Hello, welcome to the Gold Institute's discussion, the Israel Wedge, the secret strategy of America's enemies to undermine the Trump administration. I'm Ellie Gold, president of the Gold Institute for International Strategy, and this is a conversation which comes on the heels of the return of all of the live hostages from Israel that were in Gaza for the past 2 years. That was a consequential event, bringing these hostages back. But the work is clearly needs to continue. Hamas is a terrorist organization which still exists in Gaza and beyond. This is something that cannot continue. And of course, we're still waiting for the remaining hostages that were killed for their bodies to be returned for appropriate burial in Israel, and for their families to get closure. But that being said, the war that we see happening on the streets across the globe, this pro-Palestinian, pro-Gaza, pro-Hamas battle that we see on the streets, which began in part on college campuses as well, and has moved well beyond that into institutions of government and governments across the globe, across the United States, is one that cannot go unchecked or undiscussed. We must. This is something that we must. A war that we must engage with in, and the Gold Institute here on in this call or in this meeting is going to discuss some of that. When I look at the rhetoric coming from the left, both the uneducated, all the way to those who we believe should be educated. I think it's important that this is not a Jewish war. This isn't about Israel, the Jewish state. Yes, of course it is. Of course, Israel is the only Jewish state on the planet, the only Jewish country in a sea of Islamic countries and an Islamic region. But it's important that we understand why Israel is important to the United States, and this is something that's going to be discussed today. When I look at our relationship with Israel, sure, we take a look at Israel, and the Jewish people have a what we'll call a biblical ownership or relationship to the land, and it's their land. However, when we look at it from a non-religious perspective, the importance of Israel to the United States and the world is stark, is glaring, and we have to take a look at it from in context. When we have to look at the what Israel offers the globe, and we have to take a look at technology, research and development. Most major technology companies have a research and development hub in Israel, whether it's Tel Aviv or beyond. When we take a look at the source of most major agricultural technological advances, that comes from Israel. When we take a look at biotech and pharmaceutical advances, a great portion of that comes from Israel. When we take a look at defense technology, something that Congressman Trent Franks will be talking about, that comes from Israel. When we take a look at intelligence, that comes from Israel. So Israel is, if not at the leader, or it is at the top of technological advances across sectors, and something that we're going to discuss today with great interest. So let's move on to our panelists. Beginning first, we have Adam Lovinger. Adam is the Gold Institute's Vice President of Strategic Affairs, coming from a Director of Strategy for President Trump's National Security Council in his first administration, and then came to the Gold Institute. Following Adam's remarks, we'll hear from Congressman Trent Franks. Trent Franks is a distinguished fellow at the Gold Institute, spent 15 years in Congress, chaired the Missile Defense Caucus, chaired the Israel Allies Caucus, sat on the Armed Services Committees, and has done more to advance the relationship between Israel and the United States on defense than most anyone I know. And since his time in Congress, has accomplished more for that relationship on behalf of the United States than most any sitting member of Congress that I know. And following Congressman Franks, we have Saul Montes-Bradley. Saul is the Gold Institute's Vice President of Communications, who spends a great deal of time working with, of course, with media and social media in the context of Israel and many other parts of the globe. So each panelist will speak for about 5 to 7 minutes, following which we'll have a brief conversation on these topics. Without further ado, Adam, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Ellie. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you, distinguished colleagues, and I'm very happy to say dear friends. I'd like to begin by referencing this document that was put out by the Gold Institute in July. It's called the National Security Strategy, July 2025, by the Gold Institute. The essence of this document, which was presented at a conference here in Washington, D.C., was a recognition that America's enemies have learned a lesson, a very crucial lesson, which is that taking America on head on is really quite disastrous. This is a lesson that was learned during the Second World War, particularly with Japan and Germany, and it was taken to heart in the Cold War. And so the response to this lesson has been to try to attack America, try to undermine America from within using more of an indirect approach, infiltrating our institutions, the most strategically significant institutions, collaborating with those who support the strategic objectives of America's enemies inside our institutions. And this has reached, I believe, really a tipping point, which we discuss in this national security strategy. So that is the context. And by the way, this national security strategy is accessible on the Gold Institute website, if anyone wants to look at it for reference. So how does this relate to the U.S.-Israel relationship? I think there's actually a rather direct connection. And my assessment, or the assessment we have in our national security strategy, that what makes America such a formidable force is not just our military capacity, our economic capacity, but this driving sense of purpose, of national purpose, it's actually a degree of chosenness. It's American exceptionalism. And this is something that is held by Americans who are both religious, agnostic, really atheistic, the sense of American exceptionalism, of chosenness, which really, began at our founding. John Cotton, who was a Protestant minister in England, as John Winthrop, who was the early governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, as he was departing England to go to the New World, John Cotton articulated that the American people were a chosen people, just like Abraham was chosen, and that the New World was a chosen land, just like the land of Israel, and that there was a covenant that was blessed, that the American people were blessed with. And this is something that, that was in 1630. In 1776, you had John Adams and you had Benjamin Franklin, you had Thomas Jefferson. They were tasked with crafting a national seal of the United States of America. And the seal they chose, the image they chose, was of Moses leading the Israelites across the Red Sea and lightning striking down the Pharaoh and the Egyptian soldiers. And this notion that of American chosenness is a very old notion. And when for those who listen to President Trump's speech to the Knesset this last Monday, he was invoking this early American self-conception of chosenness. And he did this time and again. It's really quite remarkable. The number of times he used the word love, that Israel defeated its adversaries because of what it loved. This is precisely, I believe, the algorithm that has led to American success. We love the right things, just as the Israelites loved the right things. This is enshrined in our Bible. And this is also what makes our constitutional order so successful, because it's these Judeo-Christian values that infuse our constitutional order that is really the secret to America's success. And so I wanted just to provide that context as to why it is the topic of this conversation is the Israel wedge, and the wedge that is we're talking about is how the adversaries, the enemies of the U.S.-Israel alliance, are trying to drive a wedge between Israel and the United States, and this is really trying to drive a wedge within into the soul of these two countries, and they're trying to do this because the success, the power, the inner power that America gets and that Israel gets from these shared values is so formidable and so unstoppable that it's an existential threat to our shared enemies. And so I'll leave it with that, Elliot, at this point, but I'm happy to expand on this further.
Let me transfer this over to Congressman Franks. Here we go. But thank you for your remarks, and we're going to come back to you as well, Adam.
The first thing that I would like to do is just to say that I agree and embrace every syllable that Adam just spoke. I think that it's rare to find someone that is able to articulate as well as he. So I would just say, starting out from the beginning, that personally, I was one of those that was taught to pray for the peace of Jerusalem ever since I was a child. And there is a great deal of love and affection for the people of Israel. And I believe that God has a special hand on Israel, and that how we treat Israel will dictate the peace and security of the human family. So it's not just a small issue for me. Having said that, so many of us, as Christians who support Israel, we cite the idea that, that America has done so much for Israel. And certainly I'm glad to suggest to you that that's true. But I'm one that believes that Israel has done more for America than America has done for Israel. I think when you go all the way back to our very genesis, if you will, that the ideals of Israel, the noble commitment that this people have been a very part and parcel of the very beginning and the very they were the progenitors of America. And I'm convinced that apart from Israel, America never would have existed in the first place. So those are I think a basis for which to talk about some of our military connections to Israel. First of all, Israel is the most effective test bed of any thing that we ever have in the world for American technology. If you look at just the F-16 itself, almost 400 improvements to the F-16 were brought about by Israel telling us how to make the F-16 perform better in combat. And we took those ideas and we made a better aircraft. Now we're doing the F-35 and things of that nature, and Israel continues to do the same thing for us. I had the privilege of being the chairman of the Missile Defense Caucus, as was mentioned earlier, and I'll give you one example. The Arrow 3 has what's called a DAX, a Divert Attitude and Control System on it, that has a gimbal a nozzle that's on the seeker that's able to see in every direction. And it literally gives Israel, in many cases, a second shot at an incoming missile. And it was so superior to our design now that we're moving toward putting that on our SM-3. That alone is something that increases the national security of the United States. Israel is, oftentimes they say Israel's kind of the canary, that what happens to Israel will soon happen to America. But we need to remind ourselves that as the terrorists call Israel the little Satan, they call America the great Satan. And it is so important for us to understand how connected we are militarily with Israel. They have done so much for the United States in the area of missile defense, in the area of technology. Some of the things that they're doing now with the Iron Beam was just put in deployment yesterday, I am convinced will be at the very heart of some of our solid state lasers in the United States that will one day have 6 or 8 satellites in a constellation that will be able to place a basketball-sized laser anywhere on the planet within 1 second after we achieve a firing solution. That's something that only the brilliant engineers of Israel could have catalyzed, I believe, even in our own country's development. One other example that I would point out on missile defense is the Stunner. Israel calls it the David Sling. I think for its range, it's one of the finest interceptors in the world, and it has more different allied and arrayed sensors in its nose cone than any other missile system that we have on Earth. And it was Israel that came up with that. It would have taken America, under our spiral development system, probably 10 years to build that missile. And yet Raytheon and Rafael worked together, and that system was essentially built in 18 months. It's a stunning situation. I was approached, I have to be somewhat cautious here, but I was approached with the idea of giving up America's involvement in helping Israel develop their Arrow 3 system. And the truth is that, I wasn't so inclined, and we were able to stay with it, and Israel surpassed all of their knowledge points, all the ones that they said no one would be able that no country could ever make. Israel's time and time and time again shown themselves to be an ally worthy of any country. They have shown themselves to be one of our most important military allies. They have shown themselves to be one of our most important, I think, spiritual allies, our most important philosophical allies. And I truly believe if we fail Israel, we will fail our own generations. We will fail our own children. And so I can't possibly express in the few more moments that I have the importance of Israel's connection to the United States. I believe that from now on we go forward together, and we need to stay together for the sake of both countries in every way. And when it comes down to seeing some of the anti-Semitism that's taking place in this country, God help us to have the courage to dismiss that completely. When people say, well, Israel, they're attacking, Hamas is actually having a lot of ancillary impact on civilians. Israel knows that. They do everything they can to protect civilians, whereas Hamas uses them as human shields. We look back in World War II and we see 50 million people died trying to stop a monster like Hitler that had no respect for the people of Israel. And the lesson is not that we need to back off on our effort to go against terrorists and against monsters like Hitler. The lesson is we need to be aware of these people coming down the road and making sure we stop them before there's this Holocaust, before there's this tragedy in humanity. And that's the lesson. The lesson is not how to to somehow appease terrorism. The lesson is how to recognize it ahead of time and prevent it from ever occurring in the first place. And part of that answer is to stay close to our greatest ally in the world.
Thank you, Congressman. Moving to our final speaker, Saul Montes-Bradley. Saul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ellie. I have to start with a little bit of a self-congratulatory note. You remember well when in February of 2020, you and I went to the US Senate to give the folks there a briefing on the incoming wave of anti-Semitism. For you and for me, it was a pressing issue. We saw it coming. We knew it was coming. We wanted to ring the bell and alert everybody of what was happening. Sometimes I hate to be right. And this is one of those times, because just a couple of years after that briefing, we saw the incoming wave of anti-Semitism from Europe into the US through our campuses in ways that we have not seen since Europe in the 1930s. Not that it originated there, this goes back centuries, but that was the most recent, shall I say, worldly wave of anti-Semitism. It was here in the US too. FDR instructed its State Department not to issue visas for Jews escaping Nazism in Europe, returned some of them to Europe to die in concentration camps because we had already too many Jews in the US. So there is quite a root of anti-Semitism that we have tamed on occasion but not stamped out. This one is as insidious as the previous ones, and perhaps a little bit worse because it's taking hold of our youth in our universities, speaking of a future for anti-Semitism in the US that I personally wouldn't like to see. All of this is reflected in social media. It started as the somewhat foreseeable activities of bad actors and terrorist organizations that we see constantly operating in all social media. I wrote in Gander 7 years ago that these terrorist organizations promote hatred of the US using our technology and our media. And they're doing it again. By taking advantage of the opportunities afforded them by the likes of X or Blue Sky or Twitter or Facebook, they spew their venom liberally using our technology, our internet, to spread a message of hate. Those eventually became easily identifiable. So they changed tactics about 2 years ago from the outright postings of terrorist organizations like the Houthis. I can't believe, but until recently, we had Mohammed al-Houthi have its own X account calling for jihad against the Jews and Americans on our social media. We pay for that. The same thing even today with the accounts of, say, Khamenei. And yet, we do nothing about it. And I don't believe this has anything to do with freedom of speech. I wonder what Americans would have thought of the Nazi Party propagandizing against American soldiers in Philadelphia as part of an exercise in freedom of speech. It isn't. The apology of terrorism, the apology of death, the apology of crime is not protected by our First Amendment. And yet it is practiced every day. they moved from their original accounts, Mohammed al-Houthi, Khamenei, Hamas had its own social media presence, to acting through intermediaries, through influencers. And we have seen in the last 2 years a number of influencers that nobody would have thought of as anti-Semites just 2 years ago, who all of a sudden promote the idea that Hamas is not a terrorist organization, mind you. It is a political organization, and we should treat it as such. Of course, I don't know too many political organizations that kill massive amounts of people and hurt even their own people in doing so, as a matter of course. But for these influencers, Hamas is a political party. And we hear it from them, we hear it from UN rapporteurs, and perhaps more worrisome, we hear it from prime ministers of European countries. All of a sudden, 4 of the G7 are promoting the idea that Hamas is a political party that needs recognition. And in doing so, undermine efforts by the United States to find a solution to the problem, which more and more looks like, I think Trent just hinted at it, the total elimination of the terrorist organization, which is one that I embrace. I don't think there is any possibility of dialogue with people who are fanatics who just want to kill you and everybody who looks like you. That activity in social media has had a crescendo in the past 2 years, to the point that today, most of our social media is a cesspool of anti-Semitism and through it of anti-Americanism. And all of this, going to the title of this meeting, it's done by some, and by some I mean more than half, with the sole purpose of undermining President Trump. Not that anti-Semitism wasn't there before. Yes, it was. And an argument could be made with great support from the White House at the time. But a number of people who were on the margins have joined the chorus out of a will to oppose President Trump's policies in the Middle East by whatever means, fair or foul. We can see that even in those leaders, which, by the way, they are active in social media personally and through their teams, and they permanently undermine US policy and essentially defend terrorist organizations and accuse the Jews, because every time they talk about Israel, Israel is more than Jews. Israel is not the only country in the Middle East with a Western democracy, as we've said here, but the only country in the Middle East with a plurality of citizens that include 2 billion Muslim Arabs, Bedouins, Christians that took refuge in Israel when terrorists chased them out of Lebanon or Syria or Egypt. And these are large and thriving communities that are as much Israeli as any Jew. The days when Israeli meant Jew are long gone. Now, maybe 70% of Israelis are Jews, the rest are not, and they have full participation in the apartheid state of Israel. They have, a Muslim president of a Supreme Court send the prime minister to jail, or 20% of the Knesset occupied by Bedouin Arabs who happen to be Muslim, or an equal number in the IDF. So all of this is not discussed in social media. It is purposely hidden, and purposely the conversation is directed to Israel equals Zionism equals Jewry. We need to kill the Jews.
Thank you, Saul. You know, this makes me reminds me a colleague of mine, a former colleague of mine, had written a paper at the turn of the millennium, and the question that was posed to him was, "What is the greatest creation of the past 1,000 years?" After a minimal amount of thought, the response was, the greatest creation of the last 1,000 years was the United States. When we take a look at the globe, the world, since the founding of this great nation of ours, every major technological advance has come as a result of the United States of America, the ingenuity of this form of government that comes from this form of government, from individual freedoms and liberties that permit the individual to create anew. I would also argue that the founding of this country is what has led Israel to create themselves in what I'm going to say within the image of the United States, and thereby allow Israel, this small country, to create the technological advancements that I spoke about earlier and that each one of you have spoken about. Congressman, I would like to ask you a question in particular. And, you know, as we talk about the technological advancements, in particular, when we look at the Middle East, and please note you're muted, what can the rest of the world learn from Israel on how to prosecute wars? Which this may sound ironic to those who despise Israel, but to minimize civilian casualties, to have the greatest impact with the most minimal necessary damage.
Well, Ellie, it becomes pretty challenging to point to any one thing, but I'll do my best. I believe, you know, so one of the founding fathers quotes is, "The price of freedom is eternal vigilance." And I believe that one of Israel's greatest strength is their vigilance. They know what they're up against. I think Golda Meir said it once like this. She said, "In our long war with the Arabs, Israel's always had a secret weapon, no alternative." They realize what they're up against. The Jewish people, I believe, are the brightest people on earth. If you look at the science awards and things of that nature, you find that they're way disproportionately recognized as inventive, brilliant people. And you can point to a lot of those things. But most importantly, I believe that they have been so persecuted throughout the centuries that they are aware, they're more alert, and they plan ahead. Nothing could probably illustrate that better than what happened when there was this situation with Iran. Israel was so far ahead of everyone. They had so many ensconced agents and military capabilities already in place. They were aware of what they were dealing with. And my fear for America is that we just don't know how serious the challenge is that's in front of us. But Israel does. And we can learn a great deal, I think, from one word, and that's vigilance. They understand that the enemy that they're up against is dangerous, is evil, and has no respect for the innocent. And we need to take that lesson from Israel, and I believe that that's the one thing I would point to, even though there are a lot of other issues that would be also valid.
Mind if I jump in on the issue? So I agree with the Congressman 100%. I think that Israel's secret weapon when it comes to the conduct of warfare is that Israel adheres to a moral code that, on one hand, people can say, "Oh, look, they're following the laws of war. They're trying to minimize human casualties. This is their weakness." And actually, it was either Hamas or Hezbollah terrorist who once said that, our strength. This is the terrorist speaking. Is that you Jews love life, we love death, and so therefore, we will succeed. This terrorist actually got it wrong. There's a brilliant 5th century scholar, St. Augustine of Hippo, who wrote this magnificent work, The City of God. And he's a Christian theologian. And what St. Augustine is talking about in his treatise is that those people, those nations that love the right things, that love the right things, they will succeed. And I think that you actually heard echoes of this in Trump's speech to the Knesset on Monday. The number of times he mentioned love was quite extraordinary. I kept thinking, this is St. Augustine. He's referencing St. Augustine. And so when you see the history of Israel, the modern state in 1948, it was surrounded by enemies, surrounded by adversaries that wanted to destroy it. It is through Israel's love of the right things, through principled conduct, that it has been able to overcome all of these adversaries. So when you look at the Middle East today, I was just in Europe recently, in Austria, when there was lots of Europeans meeting there. One European member of parliament told me, "Adam, today that in Arab capitals, you have greater pro-Israel sentiment than you do in most European capitals." This is somewhat of a miracle, in that the success of Israel loving the right things and conducting itself in a way that has instilled the trust for the Abraham Accord countries to come together, to have given the Iranian people hope that I believe will lead to the demise of the Islamic Republic of Iran. This loving of the right things has made Israel strong, as it has America. And so it's adhering to these values. These are our secret weapons. And returning to the topic of this talk, the Israel wedge. After October 7th, you saw this incredible outpouring of money coming from China, from Russia, from various Islamist countries, from the Islamic Republic of Iran, to America's universities, to institutions, to pay for various anti-Israel protests in Western capitals. I believe there was a recognition that October 7th it had opened up the floodgates for Israel to take care of business, it was so outrageous, just, through the horrific nature, for example, of the Holocaust, that without such a horror, the modern state of Israel may not have come into existence. With the existence of October 7th, that was a horror that opened up the political space for Israel to have achieved these great advances in eliminating its enemies of Hezbollah, of the Islamic Republic of Iran, of Hamas, of the Houthis, all of this ring of fire, which has essentially been extinguished. So the Israel wedge, America's enemies and Israel's enemies are desperate to stop this march towards realizing the loves that America and the Jewish people have for what is good, for what is just, for what is honorable. And
Amen.
I do believe, and I'll leave it at this, that part of the reason why you have this wedge growing within the right, within some self-proclaimed MAGA people, what I think is being led by the woke right, is that this is an expression of the desperation that the Chinese have, that the Russians have, that they have to divide this bond between President Trump and the Israeli government, and that the best way of doing this is not only targeting the Trump Netanyahu relationship, but dividing the MAGA movement to the greatest extent possible, because we are on an inexorable march towards victory. And once we achieve this strategic victory in the Middle East, which I believe is very much within our grasp, I think the Abraham Accords are going to grow. I think the Islamic Republic of Iran is going to collapse within a year or two, or in a short while. I believe that China and other strategic adversaries of the West recognize that once this happens, they will be next, that their threat could be extinguished to the West and to the forces of good. And that this is why we see such an outbreak of anti-Semitism, of those who are trying to divide the U.S.-Israel alliance throughout the world.
Saul, let me toss this to you. What do you see based on what you see online, in social media, in media? And I know that you're on that you do a lot of television globally. What are you seeing as the based on rhetoric, what the cause for this wedge that they're trying to put between within the Trump administration, and using Israel to do that?
Well, it would seem that they are trying to go for what they perceive to be the soft underbelly of the U.S. They think that Israel is an easier target. Now, I happen to not agree with that, but that is entirely irrelevant. In his initial presentation, Adam made reference to our enemies finding that they couldn't come at the U.S. directly. One of the examples of that is Mohammed al-Suri's call for global jihad in 2005, where he describes how total was their defeat in the fields of Afghanistan, and comes to the conclusion that jihad cannot confront the U.S. directly without ending in calamity. And he proposes a manual for future jihadists, which, by the way, they have been following to the T to this day. And he speaks of finding softer targets, and he specifically mentions Israel and Europe, in order to topple the great Satan. That is what motivates the terrorists. But what motivates the Westerners who support them, and who would ironically be their first victims if they ever came within the power of affecting that result? Well, we have a large variety of disgruntled socialists and Trotskyites and communists that have been driven out of power in all places but Spain, and of course South America. And these people see these as a joint fight against the big colonial power. How they come to the conclusion of the U.S. as a colonial power, I have no idea. Frankly, I find it amusing that a Belgian or a French politician would chastise the U.S. for its colonialism, because we all know what theirs look like. But the thing is, all of these forces find an argument outside of the problems of their own countries. So they cannot argue, for instance, in France. They cannot have a cogent argument to defend the social policies that have destroyed the French economy. So we don't talk about that. We talk about the plight of the Palestinian people. And we fabricated genocide. None of these people ever moved a finger for the genocide in Rwanda. None of them would know that there was a genocide in South Sudan. None of them give a rat's patootie about the systematic killing of Christians in Nigeria, or the 32 million refugees in Africa. That It doesn't matter. The Uyghurs, most of them wouldn't know how to pronounce it. But the Palestinians, that's easy because Jews offer a good target inside Europe too. So we have, you know, we can accuse the Jews of our evils, much like they did in the Middle Ages, show them as these evil people who perpetrate genocides. The only thing missing here is the blood libel, and Jews eat kids in the Black Mass. And these are responsible for the movement in Europe, which is parroted first by universities in the US. That's where the point of penetration is. All of these Eastern universities that would love to be France for reasons that I don't understand and Jefferson would have condemned. And they go that way and have Israel as a target by that convoluted way. You can actually see this if you read enough social media. And traditional media, ironically, has become an echo of social media. Now the reports are somebody said on Twitter this, somebody said on Facebook that, and they become mirrors of social media, which in reality shouldn't. There's no reason for social media to be as to have as much influence as it does. A very small number of Americans participate, but then media in Italy they call the right tele Hamas because it's a constant bombardment of the Italian public with the atrocities committed by Israel, all of them invented. We could say the same thing in the US of what was it that Rush Limbaugh called it? Oh, yes, MSLSD. And they do it systematically. They do it using social media as a source. And the sources they use in social media are agents for Iran, for Hamas, for the Houthis, without even trying to hide.
So let me jump in here with one final question, Saul, and everything you said is spot on. You know, one of the issues that, as you know, I meet with representatives from many countries across the globe, in many different continents. And part of the issue that they have, which is the beauty of the United States and the way our founders have created this system that we have, is that that we have a new cycle every 4 years, and we in 4 years or 8 years we have a new president, which makes it very difficult for our foreign partners to shape long-term policy or strategy with the United States. Now, that could be a positive, it could be a negative, but it is what it is. And this is, in my opinion, it is a positive. The problem, of course, becomes when in the context of a relationship with Israel, for example, the vast swing. You have Bush, then you have Obama, which is all the way on the other side. Then you swing all the way back even farther to a Trump administration, to which you swing all the way back to a Biden administration, to which you swing all the way back to a Trump administration. And obviously the relationships with Israel were vastly different amongst each administration. During the Biden administration, as Israel was attempting to engage in this war and looking towards their relationship with the United States, with their alliance with the United States, the reliance was very difficult, and there were pro-Israel, pro-American patriots in both countries that were suggesting that we need to reevaluate this relationship and go from a reliance to an alliance? The question, of course, that I pose to all of you with seeking a very brief response is can we or should we move away from this current relationship where there is a reliance on the United States within the context? Because from a military, the United States and from a defense relationship, the United States and Israel's, they are partners hand in hand. Or should we have this total alliance where Israel does not care what the president of the United States says, whether it's a Obama, a Biden, or a Trump, where they focus on the alliance and not worry about this reliance on the United States, where we're relying on the United States to get our weapons. And if we don't listen to what President Obama or Biden or Trump wants, then we can't do what we want, and prosecute this war as we so choose. And what are your thoughts, Congressman?
Well, first of all, I think that when countries are allied with each other, they need to recognize the independence and the fact that each of those countries have to act in their own behalf. And just before Trump was elected, I did videos suggesting that Mr. Netanyahu should ignore Joe Biden completely, because I thought that Joe Biden was actually working against him in many ways. But here's the bottom line. The real connection between Israel and America is one that is a connection of the heart, and it transcends even presidencies, because I'm convinced that, that George Bush was fiercely pro-Israel, and that Mr. Biden and Mr. Obama were actually, they betrayed Israel in my judgment. And of course, Mr. Trump has become one of the most pro-Israel presidents that we could ever have. But fundamentally, Israel has to do what's right for Israel, and they have to be able to rely on America's commitment to them, that the people of America, even if we screw up once in a while and elect the wrong president, that America still cares about Israel. And your last question, I found myself wishing I had said what Adam said earlier, and that is that we see Israel as a country that's dedicated to the truth. And the quote that that was essentially what Adam said, and I'll be very brief. It was Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, Adam. He said, "We have discovered here how to hit the Jews where they are most vulnerable. The Jews love life. So that's what we shall take from them. We will win because they love life and we love death." He was speaking of Hezbollah. And of course, we know how that turned out. But the real strength of Israel is their commitment to God, and that's the connection we have with them. And they have demonstrated to the world, even after the Holocaust, when any people would have given up, Israel did not. They dried their tears, as the poet said, and they raised their eyes and they looked up again, and they built a nation and they built a future. And someday Hamas will be gone, but Israel will remain. And we need to make sure that as a people that we connect with them on a spiritual and a doing the right thing basis, rather than just letting the political winds decide what we do for this day and hope somehow it turns out okay. So
thank you, Congressman.
I'll stop there.
Thank you. Adam?
I think it's an excellent question you raise, Ellie, about, which country is more dependent on the other. And when an American president gets elected that is hostile to America's core values, hostile to our Constitution, that president will typically be also hostile to Israel, and what to do about that. I think Trump said it very well. He in his speech on Monday, he said Israel is the spiritual center of the world, and the value that Americans get in Israel's existence, we see ourselves as Americans reflected in Israel. This is such a source of strength and power and inspiration and greatness. And it's the source of American exceptionalism. That's something, of course, that's hard to quantify. But, this recognition that this exists is something that I would say that most ordinary Americans feel this in one way or another. To combat those who are more narrow-minded, who just see the Israel-U.S. relationship in terms of dollars and cents, which I think, of course, misses the point. I do think that, to achieve the strategic victory, which was to continue to see America regenerated as a nation reflected in Israel, and vice versa, frankly, because I do believe that many Israelis are inspired by America's example and the success of our constitutional order. I do think that there must be continued work to bind the countries together. I think that with this the history of the U.S. Israel alliance, there's an unmistakable pattern of mutual benefit. And some very, very narrow-minded sort of bean counting accountant type, thinkers who say, well, look, Israel extracts through AIPAC all this money from Congress every year, and they just monomaniacally focus on actually a rather small dollar figure when you look at what America gets back in return. I think that we have to continue to build the argument as General Keegan did, the former head of Air Force intelligence, when he said that the intelligence that America gets from Israel is the equivalent of 5 CIAs. 5 CIA.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the budget of 5 CIAs, even though it's quote unquote a black budget, is a hell of a lot more than whatever foreign aid America gives to Israel on an annual basis. But we must continue to build this out. But also, I think we need to talk more openly about what Trump talked about on Monday, which was that Israel is is a miracle, and he referred to Israel's values, the heart of David. So instead of the star of David, the heart of David. Again, it's like he recognizes that there is so much spiritual power in the
Yes.
relationship that nothing in this world, the Chinese government, which has horrible values, the Russian government, horrible values, the Islamic Republic, these people have horrible values. America's and Israel's enemies, fortunately, have horrible values. And that is why our values, the Judeo-Christian values of Israel and the United States, will prevail. And, we need to continue to amplify that message.
Thank you, Adam.
Outstanding.
Saul?
Outstanding.
I wonder if the money that the U.S. gives to Israel, according to these people, includes the money that the Biden administration wasted creating anti-Netanyahu protests in Israel and trying to destabilize their government. I have a feeling that that is not counted and that is not compared to whatever American Jews raised for Israel through AIPAC, because let's remember, Israel has nothing to do with AIPAC. Other than people in AIPAC love the state of Israel. Your friends abroad, Eli, are roughly mistaken if they think that we change policy every 4 years. We do every 2 years. And if anybody has a question on that, take a look at what happened to George Bush in 2006, when essentially the government transferred to Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid. Even though the president remained, the country's policies changed dramatically from that point on. Every 2 years, we have changes in Congress or not, depending on how things go. But that is the instability of our system. We cannot guarantee the same outlook next year as we have today, regardless of whether President Trump remains in office or not. And that's a peculiarity of our system that tends to find the middle over time. But on the day-to-day can be quite unnerving. Incidentally, the same thing happens in Israel, where governments change. And today we have the merry coincidence of Netanyahu and Trump. But imagine if it was the Labour Party and how their relationship to President Trump would be. It goes both ways. That is, of course, always reflected in the activities that I'm concerned with all the time. Yes, I understand Trent's insistence of the uniqueness of Israel, although I believe that we have an equal right ever since my ancestors came to build the New Jerusalem uh, right outside Salem, Massachusetts, not Boston. And they have been building it ever since, because the New Jerusalem is a project, not a place made with hands. It's a place made in our minds. And some have lost the way, and all of a sudden they're trying to build the new Stalingrad. Uh, but for the most part, most of my cousins in Massachusetts still have this idea, whether they articulate it or not, of the uniqueness of the US as the New Jerusalem, as a point of light to the world, which we are. The greatest invention, not in the last 1,000 years, since we walked out of the savannah in Africa, is the US. And to this day, it's a unique experiment in self-government, which Israel kind of emulates, but not quite. No country in the world has the kind of government we do, with all its blemishes, with all its warts. And God knows we have them. But the idea that the people can govern themselves without assistance from a pontiff, without imposing a religious view on the populace, I don't think there is another country in the world, with the possible exception of Israel, which is different in other ways. They don't have a constitutional republic. They model more after England than the US in many respects. So if we understand that, if we understand that some things, we're going to get wrong. I think it was Churchill that said, Americans always end up doing the right thing after they try everything else. Well, we are in the process of trying everything else right now. And I have every confidence that, as before, we will end up doing the right thing. And the right thing won't be Obama trying to return to the 1967 borders and treating Hamas and the PLO as political interlocutors. No, they're not. They're terrorists. There's nothing to talk about, not only with Hamas, but with Palestinian Islamic Jihad, with Fatah. There's nothing to negotiate.
Thank you, Saul. This I couldn't have said it better. I do, and this brings to a close, but I do want to end with some thoughts on what we've discussed here today. President Reagan once told the story, the very famous story of a Russian or Soviet and an American talking, and the Soviet says to this American, "I have as much freedom of speech as you do in America." And he's in America says, "How is that possible?" He says, "I can go," he says, "you can stand in Lafayette Park, or you can go into the Oval Office, bang your hand on the desk and say, 'I don't like what President Reagan is doing.'" And he says, "Yes." He goes, "I can do the same. I can walk into the Kremlin and bound my hand on General Secretary Gorbachev's office desk and say, 'I too don't like what President Reagan is doing.'" Here in the United States, we have this wonderful opportunity to express our opinions. And with the advent of social media, with the evolution of media, with the freedom of speech that we have in our cities and our streets and even our college campuses, it is important that we have the opportunity to give our opinions and share and have opinions that others, like the four of us sitting here, may not necessarily agree with. But that being said, what is most important, and I think was articulated here today, is that before we go to the streets, before we go to media and social media, it is important to think through and think about what we are here protesting, what we are here reporting on. Sure, is Prime Minister Netanyahu and the way he's engaging in every account, is that way the way each of us like it? Maybe yes, maybe no. But the question would be to the Republicans, to the quote unquote MAGA Republicans, is everything that President Trump doing is something the way that you would like it? Is to those on the left, is everything that President Obama or Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Chuck Schumer, is that what you approve of? And the answer is no. The question we must engage is nobody is perfect, but that being said, what is the best form of perfect that we do have? And engaging in a relationship with Israel, as we've tried to articulate here today, is far superior than to engage, and the outcomes that we receive is far greater than any relationship that we have with Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Houthis, or any other of these terrorist organizations that would sooner destroy everything that we hold dear than to take into account the comments that you're making in front of Columbia, Harvard, the White House, or anywhere else across the globe. So if we have taken anything from today, it is have your opinions, pursue them to the fullest, but think before you do. With that, I want to thank our panelists, Vice President of Strategic Affairs for the Gold Institute, Adam Lovinger, distinguished fellow Congressman Trent Franks from the great state of Arizona, and our Vice President of Communications, Saul Montes-Bradley, for a wonderful discussion. And again, I want to say that while it is great, and great credit goes to of course God, President Trump, and Prime Minister Netanyahu for bringing back those hostages alive in this. There's great work to do with the terrorist organizations, Hamas, or now known as Gaza Security Forces, are still there. Terrorists and the United States and Israel and the rest of our allies will not have peace until our terrorists are defeated. With that, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank
you,
you
Eli.
all. What an
Thank
honor
you,
to be with
everyone.
all of you.